Hello and welcome to the session Education in Ancient India. History of Indian education. Indian education has a very rich history and it is also really interesting. One can trace the ancient Indian education to the 3rd century BC. During the ancient days, the sages and scholars rendered education orally, but after the coming up of letters, it took the form of writing. People used palm leaves and barks of trees to write information, and this helped for the spreading of literature. Even though there were no schools that time, temples and community centers often took the role of schools. It's the spread of Buddhism that made education available to everyone. The Buddhist monasteries led to the establishment of some world-famous educational institutions like Nalanda, Takshashila and Vikramshila. Nalanda flourished from the 5th to the 13th century AD and developed as university and also was famous for its excellence. This university had around 10,000 resident students from all over the world and teachers on its roll at one time. It was in the 11th century that the Muslims established elementary and secondary schools. They too formed few universities in cities like Delhi, Lucknow and Allahabad. Medieval period witnessed excellent interaction between Indian and Islamic traditions in all fields of knowledge like theology, religion, philosophy, painting, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, fine arts and architecture. Later, when the British came in India, as a part of the upcoming of European missionaries, English education came into being. Since then, Western education has made steady advances in the country. British men formed hundreds of universities and thousands of colleges affiliated to them almost in all disciplines. Thus, India could position itself as a country which provides quality higher education to its people and to the world in general. Introduction to ancient Indian education. If one tends to ask what education is, it is in its technical sense the process by which society deliberately transmits its accumulated knowledge, skills and values from one generation to another. India has a rich tradition of learning and education right from the antiquity. Indian culture had a pride in knowledge, and so knowledge, intelligence and spirituality held very important places in India. The ideal of education has been very noble and high in ancient India. Its aim, according to Herbert Spencer, is the training for completeness of life. Numerology, grammar, music and fine arts, etc. had their origin in India. The Indians in the past made strenuous efforts to conduct experiments and research in the field of education and devised an original system of education. India even had some universities specialized in different areas of education. For example, Kashi University specialized in the area of Vyakarana Shastra, grammar. Alankara Shastra was the speciality of the University of Kashmir. Ujjaini University imparted knowledge in Nyaya Shastra, law. The science of law was taught in its pure form there. The science of Ayurveda was also developed in India. The ancient system of education was based on Shabda Pramana, that is, the word of mouth. The entire process of communication was oral. There was no timetable, no curricula or particular syllabus. The teaching learning process was entirely a heart-to-heart thing. Ancient Indian education involved three basic processes. First one includes Shravana, stage of acquiring knowledge by listening. Second one is Manana, meaning pupils to think, analyze themselves about what they heard, assimilate the lessons taught by their teacher and make their own inferences. And the third one is Nidhyasana, meaning comprehension of truth and apply it into real life. Education was mostly based on Vedas. The period from 1500 BC to 600 BC is known as Vedic period. Vedic education included proper pronunciation and recitation of the Veda, the rules of sacrifice, grammar and derivation, composition, versification and meter, reasoning, including logic and the skills necessary for an occupation. Teaching Upanishads was also a part of education. Even though India can boast of a very rich traditional system of knowledge, including the Vedas, Puranas, Ayurveda, Yoga, Kautilya's Arthashastra, etc., the education was confined within a small section of Indian society. The medium being Sanskrit, masses remained away from the formal education. The three upper classes of the society, namely Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, were privileged to have education. By the ceremony named Upanayana, the boys of these three classes are initiated to Vedic study. There are evidences of imparting formal education in ancient India under the Gurukul system, about which we are going to explain in detail later in this study. Two epic poems formed as part of the ancient Indian education, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, both attempting to explain the themes of human existence and concepts like dharma and karma. Module 2, Gurukula system of education. Gurukula is the formal education system in ancient India. Studies show that even though learning and knowledge held a very prominent place in ancient Indian society, there were not much formal education systems to implement the study effectively. Still, Gurukula, a very important concept associated with the pursuit of knowledge in ancient India, proved to be a successful formal education system. A Gurukula was a place where a teacher lived with his family and trained the students in different subjects. The Gurukulas normally existed in forests away from the buzz of the towns and cities. Once one pupil got admission into the Gurukula, he is supposed to obey the teacher and to accompany wherever he goes. He has to do all the housework. By doing all these and obeying the orders of Guru, he had to gain Guru's trust and confidence. Then only Guru will start teaching advanced subjects. Life in a Gurukula was not so easy for the people. Students were supposed to keep rigorous discipline. They had to live in a very somber environment, practice celibacy, and strictly follow discipline and virtue. The Gurus did not collect any fee for the services they rendered, but the students had to pay a heavy price by foregoing all comforts and subordinating their wills to those of the Gurus. Even though a student lived in the house of the Guru is not supposed to give him food. The student had to go out and beg for food. Even for begging, there were rules and restrictions. He was not allowed to beg from certain people who are related to him or wicked or committed any mortal sins. He was not allowed to eat certain types of food and also to talk to women. Enjoyments like singing and dancing were a strict no to him. He had to show great respect to the members of Guru's family, even to the younger ones. Students were given holidays, such as the days marked as Ashtami, Chaturdashi, Amavasi, and Purnima. Gurukula system was found to be very effective in the sense it provided the children a chance to educate themselves under the close supervision of their teachers, especially in a family atmosphere. The aim of each student in the Gurukula was not to get a certificate. Instead of that, he preferred to gain mastery over every subject he was taught. The student needed great concentration during the study to memorize whatever he has learned. Writing was not that much popular that time. However, there are also some deficiencies to this system. It was a highly centralized system in which the authority of the master was final, and also there were no guarantee that the master was teaching the right and correct knowledge. It was definitely a caste-based system. Students from a particular caste were allowed. It was an excessively austere system in which parents had almost no control. The study was memory intensive, so there was little scope for creativity and experimentation. In the Gurukulas, the teacher treated the students as their own children. So, the teacher had the power to punish the students when it is needed. Frightening, fasting, bathing in cold water, and banishment from the teacher's presence were common modes of punishment. Apart from Gurukulas, vocational education in some professions were also given to children by their own family members or the heads of the family. Children learned professions like carpentry, jewelry, metalworks, stone carving, cattle breeding, agriculture, etc. by working as apprentices under experienced professionals. Knowledge was also imparted by wandering teachers known as charakas, who travelled from place to place and spread knowledge among people. In addition, kings like Janaka often held religious conferences in which many scholars, various regions were present. Curriculum. Education stretched over a period of several years. Manusmriti suggests a period of 9 to 36 years for the successful completion of education in a Gurukula. For the students, therefore, learning was like a journey. Religious learning required the study of either the Smritis such as the Vedas or the Shrutis such as the Dharma Shastras, the Vedangas, the Darshanas, the Puranas, and so on, or both. Students who specialized in the Vedas were known as Vaidikas, and those who specialized in the Shastras were called Shastrins. Those who devoted their life to scriptures were called Naishtikas. Some students focused mostly on theory and were known as Vidyasnadakas. Some focused on practice and referred as Vradasnadakas. Those who engaged in both were referred as Vidya Vradasnadakas. Vocational education was also prominent. Some important vocational courses of the period are Brahma Vidya, knowledge of Brahman; Sarpa Vidya, knowledge of snakes; Kshatriya Vidya, knowledge of the weaponry and martial arts; Tantra Vidya, knowledge of the chakras and energies; Buddha Vidya, knowledge of spirits and animals; Alchemy, conversion of base metals into gold; Ayurveda, knowledge of medicines; Jyotisha, astrology; Nakshatra Vidya, astronomy; Pashya Vidya, cattle breeding, rearing, branding, etc. and many others like stone carving, wood carving, metallurgy, weaponry, elephant taming, political science, knowledge of trade and commerce, had also existed in the ancient times. Module 3. Universities and Centers of Education. A university stands as an all-time symbol of the education system of a particular place in a particular time. The study about a university reveals how good or bad education system had existed in a specific period. Obviously, the growth of a university shows nothing but how far the people encouraged the education and learning. Thus, we can understand the ancient Indian education by studying the history of some universities existed that time. The advent of Buddhism and Jainism brought fundamental changes in the field of education. Education has got a democratic character after the upcoming of Buddhism and Jainism. The first millennium and the few centuries preceding it witnessed the flourishing of higher education at Nalanda, Takshashila University, Ujjain, and Vikramshila universities. Almost all subjects like art, architecture, painting, logic, grammar, philosophy, astronomy, literature, Buddhism, Hinduism, Arthashastra, law and medicine were taught in these universities. Each of the university specialized in a particular field of study. Takshashila focused on the study of medicine. University of Ujjain laid emphasis on astronomy. But Nalanda handled all branches of knowledge. It was the prominent university of all the others. Nalanda, this university was founded during the Gupta period. Both Huansang, the Chinese traveler who came to India between 630 and 644 AD, and Itzing, who came a few years later, visited this university. From their writings, we can know about its greatness. They described Nalanda as a great center of Buddhist and Sanskrit learning. It even had libraries that went by such names as Ratnaranjak and Ratnodadi. The university stood for the freedom of thought. Students and teachers exchanged ideas through debates and fruitful discussions. Admission into the university was based on previous academic excellence and through an entrance examination. The exam was so difficult that hardly 20% passed. The ruins of the most famous ancient university can still be seen in Bihar, India. Takshashila. Actually, this is the world's first university. It was situated about 50 kilometers west of Rawalpindi in Pakistan. It was an important Vedic, Hindu and Buddhist center of learning. It was not a well-organized university like Nalanda. There is some disagreement about it can be considered a university. While some consider it to be an early university or center of higher education, others do not consider it a university in the modern sense. It was specialized in the study of medicine. Panini, the famous Sanskrit grammarian, Kautilya, Chanakya, and Charaka, the famous physician of ancient India, and Chandragupta Maurya were the products of this university. It gained its importance again during the reign of Kanishka. It was probably the earliest of the ancient seats of higher education. Takshashila is perhaps best known because of its association with Chanakya. The famous treatise Arthashastra, Sanskrit for the knowledge of economics, by Chanakya is said to have been composed in Takshashila itself. Vikramshila. This university belongs to the Pala period, that is, between 10th and 12th century AD. This was also a famous Buddhist learning center. This university was established by King Dharmapala. It was one of the largest Buddhist universities. Subjects like philosophy, grammar, metaphysics, and Indian logic were taught there. But the main focus of study was Tantrism. It produced eminent scholars in Buddhist learning, culture and religion. One of such scholars was Atisha Dipankara, who was the founder of Sharma traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. In the south, Kanchi was famous for its studies, while the Vallabhi University was no less. In short, India held a very good position in education and learning. The concept of zero, decimal, and Pythagoras' theorem were all developed here only. Still, as India progressed from ancient to medieval, its education system deteriorated. Various factors contributed to the deterioration of this most efficient and most ancient system of the world. Module 4: Education of Women in Ancient India. A study on ancient Indian education won't be complete without mentioning about the female education in ancient India. The studies show that in Vedic times there was no discrimination of sex in the field of studies. A particular mantra was prescribed to beget a learned daughter in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. In the same Upanishad, we find Gargi and Maitreyi distinguishing themselves in Brahma Vidya, the highest knowledge. In the Grihya Sutras are found several mantras to be recited by women, and the commentary on Gobila Grihya Sutras states that the female folk should be taught, for without such studies they cannot perform Agnihotra sacrifice. Both Panini and Patanjali refer to women admitted to Vedic study. Thus, a woman student of the Katha school was called Ekati, and the Rigvedic Bahuvricha school Bahuvrichi. Female students were also admitted to the study of Mimamsa. There were Chatri, lady students, and Ubadhyayi, lady teachers. This trend of liberal female education declined in the period that followed. The right of women for initiation to Vedic studies by way of Upanayana seems to have receded slowly, though we find mention of learned women in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. By the time of the Smritis, their education came to be limited to domestic and vocational studies only, which helped them to be good housewives. However, the study of the fine arts like dance, music, painting, and practice of innumerable crafts continued. Vatsyayana enumerates duties of a housewife, which included planting in her garden rows of trees, flower and fruit plants, and medicinal herbs, cooking, spinning, pounding, grinding, and all. A good housewife should have the knowledge of wages of servants, the care and welfare of cattle, looking after domestic pets, and purchase household items were the duties of a housewife. Vatsyayana also lists 64 arts which were to be mastered by women, which included, besides those given above, reading of books, preparing medicines, recitation of difficult slogas, knowledge of dramas and stories, knowledge of languages of different countries, and knowledge of science of physical exercise and development of body. All studies explaining the female education in ancient India mention about the three classes of women, namely the women of nobility, courtesans, and nuns. The courtesans occupied a special status in the society and cultivated various types of arts and crafts to distinguish themselves in their profession. At a very young age, they were carefully instructed in the arts of dancing, acting, playing musical instruments, singing, painting, preparing perfumes and flowers, in reading, writing, and expressing themselves with elegance and wit, even in outlines of grammar, logic, and astrology. They were also taught to play various games with skill and dexterity, how to dress well and show themselves off. Women of Buddhistic and Jaina faiths had comparatively more freedom to pursue the path of knowledge because, according to their respective precepts, womanhood was no bar to salvation. Let us summarize the major points in this session. In this study, we have attempted to cite the educational systems existed in the ancient India. So, we have traveled through history to find out what kind of education people was offered in our ancient times. We have seen that education and learning had a very important place in our ancient culture. It is explained in the study very well that Gurukula was the main organized system of learning. We discussed about how students were admitted to Gurukula, what kind of knowledge was given there, and about some duties the students had to perform in the Gurukula. The advantages and disadvantages of the system also have been discussed above. Later, we attempted to explain the famous universities and centers of education in ancient India. The education of women in ancient India is also clearly stated in the project. Now, you can try to answer the questions here. What are the three basic processes involved in the ancient Indian education? What is known as Vedic education? What are considered to be the deficiencies of Gurukula system? List the major centers of learning in ancient India. You can go through the books given here for further reference. The Educational System of the Ancient Hindus, written by S.K. Das, Calcutta, 1933. Education in Ancient India by A.S. Altekar, Benares, 1958. Hope that you have enjoyed this session. We can meet again with another topic. Thank you.